Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, Nadine Speaks. If you're a returning subscriber, welcome back. If this is your first time seeing this beautiful face, don't forget to hit on that red subscribe button down below and click that bell to get notified of my new videos. So, how exciting, guys. We finally have a bunch of COVID vaccines floating around. A vaccine has been approved, actually 2 in the United States as of now, and many more to come. So I thought, as your handy dandy scientist, public health professional, I could help you in figuring out what all this means and how did we get here. Remember guys, I made a video about COVID and just unpacking antiviral drugs, giving you all that scientific knowledge so you at home can talk about it during the holidays and actually know what you're talking about. Today, I thought I would come on here and use my voice to basically unpack all the different information that we're being given about the vaccines. In this video specifically, I wanted to show you the different phases of a clinical trial and how a drug goes from before it's even tested on humans to finally being tested and approved by the FDA. And we're just in a really exciting time now. There's a little bit of glimmer of hope out there for those that have been stuck at home, and you know, now we can kind of exhale a little bit and look forward to the future of being healthy globally around the world. So like I said, in this video, I'm gonna go through the different phases of a clinical trial and what the goals are of each phase and how they kind of sped that up to get the vaccines that we're seeing now being authorized for emergency use. In my next couple of videos, I plan on talking about the different kinds of vaccines that they're out there, because there's different technologies that can be used to produce vaccines. So I'll save that for another video, but right now let's dive in to the different phases of a clinical trial. First of all, before I even start, what is a clinical trial? So a clinical trial is a way to test new methods of diagnosing, medicating, and preventing diseases. The main goals of a clinical trial are to assess safety and effectiveness. So safety, is it safe or is it harmful? This is what we're typically figuring out in humans at this time. And then you have, is it effective? Is it better at treating than what is around for treating it, or is this a new drug and does it actually treat the actual condition that we're trying to figure out? For a clinical trial, they are assessing new medications or combinations of medications, or let's say it's a medication that's already commercialized or approved. They want to see if it can be used for something differently. So for example, Viagra was actually first indicated for use in blood pressure, not erectile dysfunction, which is really interesting. And that all came about from a clinical trial. And then the fourth thing that they like to assess is medical devices. So all the different implants that you use, such as a pacemaker, or even they have brain stimulation now, is all from clinical trials. So before we even start usually clinical trials, we actually try these new methods, whether it be a new drug, a new device. We usually study it preclinically, and this means that we're studying it on animals or cell lines. So we're seeing how it affects the animal before we test it in humans, which is great, right? Because we want to limit the amount of harm usually to humans. Actually, I don't know if you guys know this, but at the beginning of my career, I used to work in a lab. So I used to work in a breast cancer lab, and I used to look at breast development in mice, which is really interesting. And also in the lab, they used to have different chemotherapy drugs for breast cancer, and they used to test it on the mice that had tumors. And they also used to test it on cell lines. So I won't go too much into cell lines because I could also make a whole video about this, but let me know down below also if you want me to make a whole video, because I'm I with pleasure will talk about cells for days, but they actually have human cells that have been cultured outside of the body, and you can test different drugs on the human cells without harming an actual human, which is so cool. Science sometimes blows my mind. I can't believe how far we've come in such a short time. So I'm so excited to tell you more about clinical trials. So after preclinical, that's after we're testing it on animals and cells. Then if we see some sort of safety and effectiveness on the animals and cells, we go to phase 0. The first phase is actually phase 0. And in phase 0, they want to test, first of all, is it safe? If I put this in a human, how are they going to react? Is it safe? Is it harmful? Is it safe? If it's safe, you can proceed to go and collect your 200. Also, they also want to figure out if what they're actually injecting is going to the target. So like, let's say it's a cancer clinical trial and they're targeting specific tumor cells. Well, they want to inject it in humans first in a small population, less than 15 for phase 0. And they want to assess if it actually went to the tumor that they were trying to go to. So that's phase 0. Then, if all else is good to go, we go to phase 1. So in phase 1, they also want to assess safety, but it's with a larger group of people, and they also want to assess the highest tolerated dose. Now, this is a term that they use all the time, but they will do these dose escalation studies. So that means that they will have a group at one dose, and then they keep going in higher doses and see how well it's tolerated. At phase 1, they also start collecting adverse event data. Now, adverse events, I don't know if you've ever heard this term, but it basically means side effects. So when they inject the dose, is the human experiencing any side effects such as high blood pressure, high blood sugar? Do they have normal lipid function, normal kidney function? In order to assess this, they do take a lot of labs and a lot of scans, just depending on what the drug, what kind of effects the drug might make on the human body. There's a lot of assessments, and most of the assessments include this thing called PK studies. Now, PK studies are basically when you're in a room and they're collecting blood at 0 to 3 to 6 to 9 hours, whatever timeline they want, and they want to see how the drug is being metabolized in your system. So they can say, at this time in your blood we saw the most drug in your serum and blah blah blah. This is really interesting for scientists, because this is where exactly in the moment is they tell you what's the highest dose with the least number of side effects, so that when you're reading a medicine label at home and you see, oh, this is how much I should take, that's because in the clinical trial, they were able to assess in that clinical trial that if you take this amount, you will have the least number of side effects for that amount. So it's pretty cool. Go to your home and look at your medicine label, and it says, Advil 800 milligrams in 4 hours, and that's how they got it, phase 1. So if phase 1 goes well, they are testing it on a high number of population, and then they have different groups with different doses. So once they gather all that info, and they're also, after a phase, they're also assessing the data as well. And if the FDA approves it to go on to the next phase, then we go to phase 2. Okay, so I just want to throw a little bit of statistics out there so you can kind of wrap your mind around it. But for all the drugs that got to phase 1, only 70% make it to phase 2. So if they test a medication and it doesn't pass phase 1, then what do? They go back to square one and usually go back to preclinical studies or phase 0 to figure out what they need to figure out before going on to the next phase. We did phase 1, we found out the highest tolerated dose with the least number of side effects and if it's safe. So in phase 1, they're not only on trying to figure out the dose, but they're trying to figure out how best to administer the dose. So can it be taken orally? Can it be taken, you know, topically? Or does it have to be injected via IV? So this is also what they're deciding in phase 1. So after they've made all their decisions in phase 1 on how to administer it and what is the dose that they want to proceed with, they go to phase 2. So in this phase, they actually administer it to a greater population, and this is where they're really gathering all their information on the adverse events. So different clinical trials will have different adverse events to look out for, and they actually, as a person that was monitoring people on clinical trials, we, you know, talk to the subjects and we ask them what kind of side effects they have. We do blood labs, different labs, just figure out, you know, if their labs are higher or lower than normal, and then we grade these adverse events. So I challenge you to look online for adverse event grading, but it's really cool. They have this whole book of different adverse events you can have. For example, if you have high platelets, it's thrombocytopenia, and there's grade 1 through 5, and depending where the number of platelets you have or whatever your lab number is, you can grade it from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, if the subject is experiencing grade 4 or higher adverse events, those are really high and really abnormal, then we have to report them, you know, to the drug company or whoever's running the trial. And depending on how many people experience that similar adverse event, that's how they write the side effects on your medicine bottle as well. So, and if you hear all those drug commercials, they'll tell you, and experiencing depression and suicide and all those like small little voices of all the side effects. That's what they gather from clinical trials, which is so cool, because without clinical trials, we wouldn't know all that information. For all the people that volunteer and use their body for science, we're truly grateful that we have all that data, so that when you test it out on a large number of subjects, you can say this percentage experienced this percentage experienced, you know, headaches, or this person had low glucose level, or what have you. But that's how they figure out those side effects, is merely testing it on humans and gathering all that data. So now that we made it to phase 2 and we've gathered all our adverse event data, we can go on to phase 3. And fun fact, only 33% of those that made it to phase 2 go on to phase 3. So phase 3 gets a little more complex, because, you know, in each phase they're testing, kind of compiling the testing. So in phase 3, now that we've gathered all our adverse events, but mind you, like throughout all phases, they're always going to gather adverse event data. For phase 3, they're really testing if the new medication or device that we're testing out, we've tested out in phase 1 and 2, if that is better than what is already commercially available. So this is when things get really technical, because we want to make sure the science is very precise, and we want to actually compare if the new thing that we're trying to test is better than what's out there already. They'll do things like randomized trials. So that's a big thing we hear, like, what is a randomized clinical trial? Well, that means that they use a fancy computer and a fancy logarithm, and the computer decides who gets what. So does this subject get this new medication, or the combination of medications, or do they get nothing at all? And if they get nothing at all, I'm sure you've heard on the news, that is called a placebo. So placebo means you did not get anything, or in some cases when they're testing the new drug versus the current drug, they give you the current drug. They can't be harmful. You can't knowingly be harmful to a subject and give them like absolutely nothing. That is if there's a current medication that's already readily available and that will treat them. And things like the vaccine, there's nothing currently available to treat it, or a vaccine that's currently available. So what they're doing is they're randomizing vaccine versus the control. Control means nothing. In this case is a placebo. Another thing that you'll hear out there with phase 3 trials is a double-blind study. So when we talk about blindness, that means that the subject and the person giving the vaccine does not know that it is the vaccine or if it's a placebo. So this allows there to be no bias in the trial, so that the subject won't be like, oh, I got the vaccine, I'm already feeling better, because we already know that there is a placebo effect, and that sometimes when people receive nothing, they actually say that they feel better when they actually didn't receive anything at all, which is crazy, but that's how the human mind works. It's powerful. So now that we know the words randomized and double blind, and actually the vaccine trials were both randomized and double blind, so it's really good science, what are their goals for phase 3? Well, their goals for phase 3 are to also, you know, close the loop on the safety aspect of the new drug or medication or device, and they're trying to figure out if it's actually effective. So they're testing large amounts of people to figure out if the thing that they're testing is actually good at treating it or not, and how effective it is. So we've heard numbers for the vaccine out there that it's 94% effective, or it's 90% effective, and that means that in the 40,000 people, or how many their population was, that it was effective at preventing COVID or the illness that we're testing. After phase 3, they found that it's safe and it's effective, and so great, now we can take all our data that we've collected, we can analyze it, we can give it to the FDA. And what's also cool about the FDA is they collect all the raw data, so scientists have not had a chance to manipulate it at all. So the FDA does their own audit of the data and says whether they want to approve the device or not, and what they want to approve it for, because each drug and each device always has an indication. So what is it used for? If you want to use a drug for a different use or a different population, you have to go through the whole clinical trial experience again for that drug and device. We reached, finally, after phase 3, the drug has been approved, and now we're in phase 4. So what is phase 4? So in phase 4, they're looking at the long-term side effects. So I like to think about this in my head for cancer clinical trials. So if you use this certain chemotherapy, how long did people survive after they were given this drug? So in cancer, they do 5-year survival. If, you know, people actually reach 5-year survival, then they do 10-year survival, and they can tell someone, if you take this drug, you have a higher chance of reaching 5-year or 10-year survival. And so this is when we're following up with subjects and we're seeing if they're alive or if they have any long-term side effects. Now, the vaccine trials have not reached this moment. What they've reached so far is the fact that they have been emergency approved. So they've gone after they've done phase 3, and then they did an emergency use authorization, obviously because we're in a deadly pandemic right now, and they were like, look, we got to get this out here fast. So the FDA went ahead and approved it for emergency use. But unfortunately, that's not the end of the road. We need to figure out the long-term side effects of the vaccine and its long-term effectiveness in regards to immunity. So think about that, because that is important, whether it wants to be discussed or not by the news or anybody like in our country. You still need to think for yourself, and you still need to realize that we don't know the long-term side effects. And I don't want to steer you away from getting the vaccine, because you don't, it's like, do we want to die? I don't know. So just think about that in your head, and what do you think about that? Leave a comment down below of vaccine trials in phase 4. Now, after, you know, we've done phase 4, usually we go to commercialization and they start manufacturing the drug on bigger scales. Now in this case, they've actually were manufacturing the drug the whole time that they were in all the different phases, so that's why it didn't take so long to get it ready to go. I will also make a whole video on the vaccines and operational warp speed because there's way more detail that I need to go into, but I thought I would just tell you the different phases of the clinical trial so we got all that information down. And I'll see you in my next video talking about the vaccines. I want to talk about Operation Warp Speed. I want to talk about the different types of vaccines that are out there. So there's so many technologies that are being used, and can you believe that there's over 80 vaccines already like being produced, different types? That kind of blew my mind, and I didn't realize that actually. So I also wanted to include in this video real quick that if you did get the vaccine, there is a vaccine adverse event reporting system. It's called VAERS, and you can actually download the app, and if you've already received the vaccine, you can self-report your own adverse events. Let me know down below if you found this video useful. I thought it would be good to drop some knowledge on you and just to make it easy kind of to digest for someone who doesn't have as much scientific knowledge. The only reason I have so much is because I actually went to school for it and I work in the medical field. And yeah, so let me know down below what you thought, and stay tuned for my next videos coming up on vaccines. Bye guys, thank you for watching.